If you can please welcome Anurag Khanna with modern identity providers under attack.
Thanks, everyone. That's a lot of people. And I'm sure you had a choice to either sit here and watch me talk about identity providers or go to a bar or a pub with mates. For me, the choice was easy. I had to be here. I didn't have an option. For you guys, you had a choice, and you chose this. So hats off to everyone who's sitting here. This probably is not going to take 55 minutes. I am sure people want to go out, get some drinks, chill out, have a chat. Let's see how this goes. I'm going to talk about identity providers. I'm going to talk about modern identity providers. Things like Okta, AWS, the big one, the elephant in the room, Entra ID, maybe talk about a couple of others. As you would expect, I'm going to focus on Entra ID because that's Microsoft. I love Microsoft. They do a lot of good work. And that's not because other identity providers do not have the same issues. It's primarily because Entra ID is the most commonly used identity provider in enterprises. So that's how we're going to talk about and go through this. A bit about me. I work for a company called CrowdStrike. I used to ask everyone, have you heard of CrowdStrike? I stopped asking that since last year, July. I don't have to do that. And I don't know what happened in July. I have no memory of that entire month. I also teach for an organization called SANS, picked up some certifications while through the journey, and these slides are available on that link. So you don't have to take notes, you don't have to take pictures. They're already up there if you want it. Maybe decide that after the talk is done, and you can download it from there. Okay, let's get going. Oops, the disclaimer first. My company may or may not agree with what I'm going to talk about. This is all my work. Most of this is publicly available in different places. I'm not dropping a 0 day. I don't have to. Threat actors don't use 0 days like they do, but they don't have to most of the times. Most of the times they are just using what is already available to them in how systems work, and that's what we're going to talk about. Almost everything I'm going to talk about is not a vulnerability. It's a feature. At least Microsoft wants you to believe that. We're not going to talk about how exploits are written and how 0 days are dropped out. We're going to talk about living off the land techniques. How do threat actors abuse what's already available to them? So my company may or may not agree to this stuff. Let's get moving. How do threat actors get access to modern identity providers? The good old stuff. Password spraying, password guessing, credential stuffing, MFA fatigue attacks. That was very common. It is still very common. It still gets people, threat actors through into an identity provider. But you're sitting here and you're thinking, that's not what I'm here for, mate. That's not what I left my drinks on the table and came here and listening to you talk about this stuff. Give me something new. That's what we're going to do. We're going to talk about new stuff, novel techniques, things that are not that common but are becoming very common. We're going to talk about conditional access policies. I'm sure everyone uses them. I love them. They kind of work. We're going to talk about SAML authentication. That's the bedrock of how most of the authentication works these days. Then we're going to look at OAuth, trusted relationship. We used to call it supply chain attacks. Trusted relationship maybe sounds more interesting, more newer. We're going to talk about that, talk a bit about cross-tenant attacks and abusing what we call temporary access passes. I do incident response for CrowdStrike, where I run a team of incident response consultants across Australia, Singapore, India. Work very closely with my global counterparts. So I'm very fortunate to have a vantage point which gives me visibility into what are threat actors doing. A lot of this stuff is what threat actors are doing right as we speak and talk. A lot of sophisticated nation-state threat actors are doing it, and also what I like calling advanced e-crime threat, because it sounds cooler that way. They are doing the same stuff, the same attacks. So that's what we're going to talk about. Okay, let's talk about conditional access policies. Conditional access policies are Microsoft Entra ID's way of making sure that authentication is limited to whoever is authorized for that authentication. It's like a bouncer standing in front of a bar or a pub and saying, okay, you want to get in? What's your age? Do you meet these requirements? Do you have an ID? Check all that stuff, and then giving you a ticket or a token and allowing you to get in. That's what conditional access policies do. They kind of work, but threat actors are finding ways to bypass those conditional access policies, or as we call them, CAPs. How do they do that? There are a few ways how threat actors are doing it. CAPs, conditional access policies, often have gaps. There are accounts that should not have MFA. That didn't sound right. Every account should have an MFA, but there are accounts which system administrators and IT people think should not have a multi-factor auth. CAPs are used to enforce multi-factor authentication. We're talking about break glass accounts. I have to have one account which I can use to log in when I break something or Microsoft breaks something. I get that, but threat actors love that. They figure out that there will be an account which will have an exception in a CAP which will not need a multi-factor authentication. And they abuse that, and they get in through using those accounts which are excluded. There are legacy authentication protocols, like who wants to have a phone and try to log in into M365 and then have an MFA prompt? Maybe I'm using an old legacy client which doesn't support MFA. So I need to create exceptions. And most of this stuff is being checked using user agents, the fingerprint of the browser or the client that is trying to log in. So a CAP says, if you are trying to log in using a modern endpoint tool, a modern application, you'll be forced to do an MFA. But say if you're coming from a mobile phone, then that's fine. And user agents are what threat actors can easily change, and they want to be whatever they can, and they just get in. So that's another way how MFA is being bypassed, conditional access policies are being bypassed. Another thing which a lot of organizations are using are called trusted locations. Usability and security battle, which we have always been facing. In some case, usability wins. So if you're in an office, I don't want you to force to do MFA, because I know that IP address, that's my office's public IP address. If you come from that IP address, you are trusted. Threat actors know that. They abuse this in a couple of ways. One, I get into the organization, I've compromised the system, which is coming from that IP address of the organization, and now I'm not being forced to meet the CAP requirements. Requirements like MFA. So I can do a password spraying attack, get in. Other way threat actors use this is for persistence. In this case, I'm already in Entra ID, and I'm going to add my IP address as an attacker in a conditional access policy and make it a trusted location, which means now when I want to come in, I don't have to meet MFA requirements. Probably I already know the password. All good. I'm in. I have a consistent, continuous access into your Entra ID environment. The other interesting part of conditional access policies, or that bouncer who's standing in front of your pub while checking your ID, is once they have issued that ticket to you, maybe a band which you have put on your wrist, and you are in, they don't recheck that stuff. You have that band, all good, I've already verified you. That's how conditional access policies also work. I check you when you're trying to get into the Entra ID portal, but once you are in, I'm not going to check you again. Which means if a threat actor can steal a token from the system of the user, or by performing phishing attacks, the old classic phishing attacks using a tool like EvilGenX, they can steal that token and then replay that token or use that token to access the applications that rely on Entra ID. This is a very common attack. This is an attack which we see a lot of threat actors do, including e-crime threat actors who are doing business email compromises, as well as nation-state threat actors. This does work. How do you defend against these stuffs? Review your conditional access policies. Make sure that you don't have trusted IP locations. I said, make sure you don't have trusted IP location. I sent it to a friend and asked him to review, and he's like, no, that can't happen. Just review them. I'm like, I don't have them. Like, we get on a bit of a tussle, so I had to just change it and say, please monitor it, please review it. My suggestion, don't have trusted IP locations. Make sure everyone has to do an MFA, enforced MFA every time they are trying to log in. Protect against token attacks, protect against phishing. You can enable continuous access evaluation where tokens which have been issued are rechecked to make sure that they are valid token. Doesn't work for all the applications, but certain Microsoft applications, this is a newer capability that has come out. Strongly recommend this is enabled. So that's conditional access policies. Now we are getting into something. We're going to talk about SAML. Security Assertion Markup Language is the bedrock of how authentication happens. SAML is what we use. Old school Active Directory, Kerberos was everything. everything was based on Kerberos. Now, most of the organizations are dependent on SAML. SAML tokens, a lot of this stuff, all of this stuff works through cryptography. So you have public keys and private keys signed, public key then verify that the signature is what it claims to be, all good. That's what we're going to break. First, to break SAML, we need to understand SAML. This is a very high-level diagram of how SAML works. There's a user, there's a relying, that's my user, that's my relying party, and that's an identity provider. The user wants to access the relying party. The relying party says, you can't log in into me, I don't know who you are. You know what? I trust that identity provider. Why don't you go to the identity provider, authenticate to the identity provider. Identity provider is going to issue you a token, present the token to me, and then I know who you are because I trust that identity provider. And once you have provided me a token, I have verified who you are, I'm going to allow you access to my resources. That's like short of how SAML authentication works. We're going to make it more complex. That's how SAML works. So the user is trying to go to the relying party, trying to access the relying party. The relying party says, hey user, go to the identity provider. You need to first authenticate to the identity provider. The user then goes to the identity provider, provides them credentials. If the credentials are correct, if the user has provided valid credentials, maybe met MFA requirements, if that's enforced, which it should be, a token is issued. That token is a SAML token. That token is then relayed back to the user. User takes that token, go to the relying party. The relying party verifies that token. If the verification is successful, access is granted. How does this verification happen? There is a federation trust between the identity provider and the relying party. This is where our private key and the public key part comes into picture. A private key is used to sign a token. When the token is provided to the relying party uses a public key, opens that up or verifies the signature and says, yep, everything inside this SAML token I can trust because I trust that IDP and nothing has been changed. This federation trust needs to be established beforehand. It is a pre-existing federation trust which the administrator has already established. That stuff has been done. So how do threat actors abuse this? Oh, before we go there, let's talk about chained SAML authentication. I'm here adding another identity provider. Stay with me here. We talked about how this stuff works. The user goes to the relying party says, go to the identity provider. This identity provider says, you know what? I can't validate you, I can't authenticate you. I trust another identity provider. So you need to go to that identity provider. So we're adding one more step here. This is known as delegated identity providers. There are two federation trusts now we are talking about. So this is how it looks like. Same process again. You guys know this now very well. The user goes to the relying party says, go to this identity provider says, go to this identity provider. A token is created by delegated identity provider, sent to the primary IDP. The primary IDP verifies the signature, says, yep, you have been authorized, you have been authenticated by someone I trust. I'm going to give you another token signed by my private key. Then you can provide that token to the relying party and authentication happens. That's SAML authentication with another trusted third party here. Now we're going to look at how do threat actors break this, or what attacks do happen. Before I talk about the attack that happens, let's talk about a fundamental weakness in this design. Again, it's not a weakness, it's a feature. But looking at how threat actors exploit this, what is happening here is this primary IDP, the primary IDP is trusting what it is being provided by the delegated IDP because it trusts the private key signatures from the delegated identity provider. The relying party is trusting a signature of the primary IDP. So the issue here is everyone is trusting those SAML tokens that are being signed. That is the underlying trust which everyone is following, and that's how this authentication is happening. If an attacker can break that trust or figure out a way to manipulate that trust, they're golden. That's what they can do. They can forge a token. What they need to make sure is they forge a valid token. In order to forge a valid token, they need the token signing certificate of the IDP. Rest of the stuff they can master. Rest of the stuff is just who the user is, what kind of rights they have, and some other information about the user, which is very easy to get. What is difficult to get is the token signing certificate, because that is what is needed to forge the token. If as an attacker I can forge the token, I'm in. I'm golden. That's where our first attack comes into picture, the golden SAML attack. Probably the most infamous attack. A lot of people would have heard about it, read about it. This is known as the golden SAML attack, inspired from the golden ticket attack, inspired from the golden ticket from that movie Wonka Wonka. I've not seen that movie, but I love that movie somehow. I don't know. Okay, so what happens here? The threat actor targets the identity provider. Give me an example of this identity provider. ADFS is a very common one. Active Directory Federation Services that allows Entra ID to then talk to an on-prem environment or a service to talk to an on-prem environment. That's ADFS. So if a threat actor can target ADFS or similar identity provider, they can then steal the token signing certificate. Once they have stolen the token signing certificate, they can forge a valid SAML token, send that valid SAML token, forged valid SAML token to this identity provider, which is in this case a relying party. And since that token is valid, everything is good, it works. So that's the first one. That's probably the more famous one. Let's say it's not that easy to steal the token signing certificate. Maybe it's a software as a service, or maybe an application where you don't have access to the underlying operating system of this delegated identity provider. What do you do in that case? Do you even have to steal the token signing certificate? We're going to talk about adding a federation trust. So if as a threat actor I was able to get into the primary IDP, I can make configuration changes to that IDP. Maybe I got into Entra ID, I became a global administrator or a highly privileged account. Now I can make configuration changes to the primary IDP, Entra ID. The configuration changes here the threat actor makes is they add a federation trust. When they add a federation trust, they're essentially adding a delegated identity provider and saying, you know what, here's a delegated identity provider which you trust. When someone tries to authenticate, just send them to the delegated identity provider. If delegated identity provider tells you all good, it's all good. Essentially, a threat actor doesn't even have to spin up a delegated identity provider. So it's not like if I'm a threat actor, I have to spin up an ADFS, then I have to make configuration changes, and then the ADFS server which I control, I'm going to use that to create a token. I just need to change the configuration. Essentially, just put that public part in that configuration, tell it you trust all the stuff. Now I have the private key. I'm going to start forging tokens using the private key on my laptop right here and start passing those to the relying party. This is a very common attack. A lot of threat actors do. Scattered Spider is one that comes into mind, publicly known that they used to love this attack. Did I say used to? I don't know. They still probably love this attack. They're going to probably be back. So this is a very common attack which threat actors are doing. Here they're adding a federation trust and then using a malicious IDP federation configuration and forging tokens. How do you protect against these? Use HSMs, protect your keys, don't let threat actors in your environment. Whenever someone asks me how do you protect against golden ticket attack and golden SAML attack, my usual answer is don't get hacked. That is not a great plan, not a great strategy, but that's probably the only way to protect against such weird attacks that happen. Protect your keys, don't monitor the federation settings of your IDP. If you're using Entra ID, monitor anyone trying to change those settings. Or if you have added something, make sure that's valid and it's working. It's not a test federation, which then you lose access to and someone brings up a system up. These are some of the Microsoft Entra ID logs that can be reviewed. Okay, let's move on. Let's talk about something which has been in news a lot recently, targeting OAuth 2.0. It's kind of like SAML, but it's different. OAuth is for authorization. Essentially, think of a third-party app getting access to your data. That's what OAuth is for. OAuth doesn't do authentication. In order to make OAuth do authentication, we added OIDC. With OIDC and OAuth together, now we have authentication. OAuth uses JWT tokens, JWT tokens, JSON Web Tokens, JSON Web Tokens. We're going to call it JWT tokens. That's what is used, but the underlying principle remains the same. The JWT tokens are signed. If you trust the signature, all good. That's what we're going to talk about here. This is how the OAuth authentication work. It is more complex than what I'm showing here. Let's keep things simple. Let's say this is how it works. In this case, what a user does is the user goes to an IDP. The IDP takes user's information, signs it, creates a signed JOT token, passes it back to the user sends it to the application verifies it using the same private key, public key pair, and if the application can verify it, all good, they are provided access. You would have probably guessed what kind of attack we are talking about. This is how a JSON token looks like. There is header, payload, signature is what we are after. That's the most important part. Rest of the stuff I can manage. So the entire system here is also resting on the integrity of the private key, the fact that the private key is what I trust, and I'm hoping it is not compromised. And that's exactly what happened. An attack happened on Microsoft. Storm 0558, that's a Chinese nation-state threat actor. They've probably changed their name now. I think Antique Typhoon or something, that's what they are called now. That's Storm 0558. They targeted Microsoft, and they figured out a way of creating those signed JOT tokens and relate those tokens to then get access to enterprise applications like Microsoft 365, including Outlook and email of a lot of government organizations in the US. CSRB did a report on this. I definitely highly recommend you read that. Brilliant work, amazing work. That's probably one of my favorite attacks that has happened in recent time. In this case, a consumer level signing key. So they stole a consumer level signing key. There was an understanding that enterprise should be different, consumer should be different, because consumer is consumer, enterprise is enterprise. Somehow that consumer key also worked in the enterprise, and the threat actor was able to get access and read and access a lot of emails. This is how it worked. That stuff, IDP, the threat actor doesn't have to go to that IDP. Now they can mint their own tickets in their home, right in their kitchen, and then just pass that to Microsoft, and Microsoft happily accepts it and use it. Does anyone know how that key was stolen? Anyone in this room knows how that, not the key, the signing certificate was stolen? Yeah? Last I read, Microsoft doesn't know that. They came up with a hypothesis and said, oh, it was stolen like this. And then CSRB said, there is no evidence that it was stolen like this. It's a mystery. If you know how it happened, have a chat with me after the call. I'll buy you a beer. All your beer today is on me. No one knows how it happened. And that's probably the most important thing you are safeguarding. So that's OAuth forgery. How do you protect against this? I don't know. I'll tell you how the organization that detected it. It goes back to everyone who's sitting in this room, the security analyst. The security analyst created a rule. The rule was called the Big Yellow Taxi. The Big Yellow Taxi was a same rule which was looking at the logs that were getting generated, and based on the logs it detected anomalous logins coming from IP addresses they didn't expect. And that's how they detected it. Hats off to the analyst who wrote that rule and picked this stuff up. And then Microsoft did a lot of stuff to make sure that this is not happening again. Okay, that's OAuth compromise. We're going to come back to OAuth app compromise. If you're thinking that I was saying this has been in news, why was I saying that? We'll talk about that. Just stay with me. Let's talk about trusted relationship compromises. These are partnerships that are turned malicious. They're very similar to supply chain attacks, but in this case we are talking about two organizations who have a relationship with each other. One organization gets compromised, and the access they have into the other organization is then leveraged to target that organization. So there are pre-existing technical trusts between different organizations that are getting targeted here. We're going to talk about a couple of these. We're going to start by talking about OAuth applications. OAuth applications are applications where an app is registered, and then you register it in your tenant, and then that app has access to your tenant as the app itself or as a user. Think of me providing access to an app to my Google Calendar. Now that app can read my Google Calendar. This is a very common way how a lot of these new enterprise applications work. These are called OAuth applications. They're very common in Microsoft Entra ID. A lot of you would be using it. A lot of big organizations have these apps. They are being registered, and they are being provided access to a lot of data. They have two parts. One is called the application itself, and other one is called the service principal. The application itself, also known as the application itself, also known as the app registration, is in the parent tenant, the home tenant. So I have a tenant, I create an application registration. It's like the blueprint of the application. That's where it resides. It can be identified using a GUID, a globally unique ID, also known as the app ID. It's created in the tenant of the organization. So if we are talking about an Acme Corp, which is providing an app and selling an app to everyone, this is in the tenant of Acme Corp. It does need an identity to work with. So in itself, it can't do anything. It's just an application, a blueprint that has been created. Now you need what we call a service principal. Service principal is an identity that is used in conjunction with that application registration and then does a lot of interesting stuff. So this is our service principal. It's a local representation of that app. So if you want that app, you need a service principal in your tenant, and that's how these things work. On the service principal, you can define what access the app can have. They can read all the emails, they can read all my calendar information, they can delete mails, all that interesting stuff is defined at the service principal. Service principal also has an object ID. I put that image there because I, with one of my mates, talked about this in 2021, and no one paid attention to it. And I'm like, yeah, this was an interesting attack, and no one was interested. And 5 years later, everyone now is publishing blogs on this and talking about this. And my white paper is still there. No one is reading that. Okay, let's talk about this. And this is not only an Entra ID thing, as I said. Anyone heard of this company? Salesforce? They have been in news recently for all the wrong reasons. A lot of that stuff is very similar to what we are talking about. There are app registrations and the service principals. Salesforce calls them connected apps, and the service principals are called the OAuth sessions or apps authorization. It'll make more sense as we are talking through this. So how does this attack happen? This is how multi-tenant apps work. Here's my home tenant. I create an application registration in my home tenant. I may have a service principal there. We're not focused on that part right now. We are focused on the application registration. Then, in my consumer tenants, I create service principals. So this is a company B or a consumer one going to Acme Corp and saying, oh, I want to use your app. I'm going to pay you $100,000, $1 million, depending on what it is. And I'm going to provide you access to my tenant because that's how this stuff works. And this is the service principal. And there's another company that goes to Acme Corp and says, hey, I also want to use your service. So all these consumer tenants now have service principals. The service principals have rights or access, permissions to a lot of data which is in this home, in the customer consumer tenants. This is the design of how this is supposed to work. All good till the time a threat actor comes in. They target the home tenant. They don't target the home tenant, they actually target the company that is managing the home tenant, or the home company, or the company that created that app, which may start with a D, end in a T. I don't know what I'm talking about, but you get what I'm talking about. But what is happening here is they are able to get what are called application secrets. There are secrets that are registered in this application, or that's how application has been registered. Once you have access to those secrets, you can access all these consumer tenants. So if an attacker steals the application registration secrets, they can use those secrets to access the consumer tenant as the service principal. Which means not one consumer tenant, I can access all the consumer tenants of that app because I was able to get those application registration information from the home organization. Pretty scary attack. Very scary attack. It's a very common one. CrowdStrike published a blog. That's my standard marketing stuff for CrowdStrike. That's Murky Panda, a very prolific Chinese nation-state threat actor that has been in news recently. If you search for it, you'll find a lot of blogs and a lot of publications that have happened on them. They have been doing such attacks. So that's attack one. Attack two, what else can I do? I can add my own application secrets in the application, or add my own secrets in the service principal, and then impersonate the service principal or the application. Depending on where I'm doing that, I may be able to access one tenant or multiple tenants. Or I can create my own service principals. If I do need to have access to the environment. We're talking about persistence, we're talking about continuous access, we're not talking about initial access here. So that's auth. How do you protect against this stuff? Protect your application credentials, or ask your vendor to protect their application credentials, or review what they're doing. Interestingly, Google published a blog this morning. Hats off to Mandiant for publishing this blog. They have a section talking about how this can be detected and monitored. And they come up with an interesting strategy of saying, okay, look at who's logging in from where, then look at their session IDs, and then say if IP addresses change, and if those IP addresses are locations which they don't commonly come from, and then figure out if that's malicious or not. That's a lot of work, but that's how this stuff works. So that's application attacks. Let's talk about delegated admin permissions. That's partner betrayal. That does hurt. Seen a lot of attacks that has happened this way. Microsoft has a model where they allow the CSPs, the cloud solution providers, to help organizations manage their cloud Entra environments. What they used to do, if you provided DAP roles, the initial idea was the partner, or the CSP in this case, will get full admin access to your environment. Think of IT organizations that are helping other IT organizations, Microsoft partners helping other organizations. That has since changed. They have come up with granular delegated admin privileges, which still have enough rights to get abused. So in this case, what a threat actor can do is they can target the CSP, the cloud service provider. If they are able to target the CSP, they can access all the trusted relationships that the CSP has, or all the downstream Entra ID environments that are being managed by the CSP. Let's talk about a couple of attacks. A threat actor figures out a way of getting into the CSP partner tenant. Maybe the CSP didn't do security properly. Maybe they didn't have MFA. Yep, there are accounts that don't have MFA. I get into a lot of calls with a lot of organizations who get breached, and the first question I often ask is, do you have multi-factor authentication? They say yes, and then say, you know what, but we have a program where we are shifting everyone to MFA, but we have a VPN which still doesn't have an MFA, but no one uses it. Yeah, threat actor knows no one uses it, so they're not going to use it. All that stuff still happens. So in this case, the threat actor gains access to the CSP partner tenant. Once they have access to the CSP partner tenant, they can access all these consumer tenants for which DAP roles have been assigned, or this CSP is responsible for managing those accounts. The challenge with this is, once a DAP role has been assigned, it needs to be manually removed or deleted. A lot of organizations may hire someone to set their Entra ID environments and then forget about it till the time the threat actor comes in and starts abusing it. So that's attack number one. Let's talk about attack number two. That's me dreaming about an attack. I've not seen this happen before. I hope it doesn't happen, but we live in strange worlds. So in this case, what the threat actor does is they create their own tenant, which is a CSP tenant. This has not happened probably because it's not easy to get the CSP status. You have to go through multiple steps for Microsoft to say, yep, you are a CSP now, and you can have delegated admin access. If this happens, a threat actor can create their own CSP account, and then go to other victim environments and create those DAP roles for them, and then able to manage all these environments. So like a persistence backdoor across multiple environments. That can still happen here. I'm going a slide back. If I have access to a CSP partner tenant, and I get into a company which is not a DAP, doesn't have a DAP relationship with this tenant, I can still add those DAP relationships and continue that access or have that persistence access. But this, I have not seen this happen before. I have not seen a publicly documented case of this attack. But this does work. A lot of organizations never review or limit DAP assignments. It goes back to the old mindset a lot of us have, which is, don't fix it. If it's not broken, it works. Just don't touch it. You touch it, something bad will happen. A lot of organizations still do that. How do you prevent these? Make sure your CSPs have MFA. That's easier said than done, to enforce your CSPs to have security features in place. You can look at your own logs and see if someone is doing a delegated admin access into your environment. That's one way to do it, which is pretty effective. That's what forensic analysts will also look at once they see these attacks happening in your environment. Let's talk about cross-tenant synchronization abuse, very similar to what we have talked about. In this case, this is again a feature. not a weakness, where a source tenant can push accounts in a target tenant if they have a cross-tenant synchronization configured on these two tenants. So what a threat actor can do, that's a complex slide, busy slide. So what the threat actor can do is they can gain access to a tenant with a CTS relationship with a victim. And once they have that, they can then push accounts into the victim environment and then use those accounts to access. The interesting part here is I didn't create those accounts. I don't have those accounts in my environment, but those accounts are being now used by a threat actor to access my environment. That's what makes this attack difficult to detect or the way it is. Another attack that can happen using the same B2B synchronization is backdooring victim tenants, where an attacker, once they get access to the victim tenant, they create a B2B relationship, a trusted relationship with a tenant which they control, and they go away. They have now put a persistence in place, which they can then abuse a few days later, a few weeks later, where they come back and they're like, yep, now I want access to this environment. I'm going to push those two accounts and use that access into my victim tenant to access that tenant. This is a persistence attack, setting up persistence and abusing it at a later time. Okay, let's talk about another attack that happens in Entra ID called temporary access pass. It's a feature in Entra ID where temporary access passes can be created and then handed over to the users. A lot of organizations do that for initial onboarding of users. You're trying to onboard users, so you have not provided them a valid credential. You don't have MFA enforced because it's going to be difficult to figure that out while the user is logging in for the first time. So they create what we call a TAP, a temporary access pass, a link that they send to the user clicks on it, and the user is in. You can have a TAP which works only once, or have a TAP which works multiple times for multiple days. The interesting thing about TAP is if I create a TAP for a user, I don't have to change their password, I don't have to change their MFA, I can just bypass all those configurations and keep accessing the environment. So you would have guessed that is what threat actors abuse. So what threat actors do in this case is they get access into an environment, and maybe they change the TAP policies, or the TAP policies are already very flexible and relaxed, and they start creating those TAPs and using those to log in. Even if a password is not changed or an MFA is enforced, it doesn't matter here because I have a TAP which just bypasses all the security controls you have in place. So that's another way how threat actors are bypassing MFA requirements and other configurations. How do you detect against this? You can monitor it by looking at some logs that are being generated. You can limit who can create a TAP. You can limit for how long a TAP can be created. Just maybe allow one-time TAPs or figure out another way of onboarding users. This is another one, adding MFA to a dormant account. I've seen this happen a lot, many times, more times than I would like to see stuff like this, where a threat actor is trying to log in and they are being hit by MFA, they are being kicked out by MFA, and they are just trying different accounts till the time they stumble upon an account which is a new account, which no one has used till now. This organization has a configuration where when you try to log in the first time and you provide a valid credential, then you are forced to set up MFA. Okay, you have logged in, please set up an MFA because that's your corporate policy. You need to set up MFA and then only you can log in. So what the threat actor does is either they try different accounts till they stumble on an account which doesn't have MFA and they configure an MFA, but that MFA now runs on my system, my phone as a threat actor. Or once they are in the environment, they're looking for accounts that are dormant, they figure out an account which no one uses and they add an MFA to that account. Maybe the organization figures out they have been compromised. They do what we call an eviction event. They look at all the accounts in Entra ID and say, which ones don't have MFA? We don't want any accounts which don't have MFA. And the threat actor is sneaking there and saying, my account has an MFA. That'll work for me. So this stuff is really interesting and this does work. How do you detect this? Disable dormant accounts, easier said than done. But you should be looking at dormant accounts every week, every fortnight, and just disabling the ones which are not being used, removing the ones which are not being used. When we are doing eviction events, it is really challenging, but what we need to do is look at all the MFAs that have been configured for all the accounts and then make sure they are valid MFAs. make sure that one phone number is not configured to a number of accounts, make sure that there's only one phone number configured to every account, so stuff like that. It does get into a place where you have to do a lot of manual work unless you have done a lot of pre-work to this. Another feature of Microsoft Entra ID is SSPR, self-service password reset. A lot of organizations use it because when people forget passwords, they want to reset those passwords. No one wants to pick up a phone, call the help desk, get on a video call, provide them then identity card or ID, government issued ID. I hope you have those policies in place because it's just a matter of time threat actors do the social engineering attacks and get in. So what most of the organizations do is they set up SSPR. If you forget your password, go to this portal, provide them a couple of things, maybe an email, maybe a phone number, and then you'll be issued a temporary password or you'll be provided a link where you can reset the password. Threat actors get into the environment, they change those phone numbers. Or they get into personal email addresses of people and steal those codes that are coming back to those users. Or they do a SIM swapping attack. It has become very common to see SIM swapping attacks, especially with scattered spider and similar threat actors. It used to be not that common. So SMS used to be okay. It's no more okay as a second factor. There are similar attacks in AWS. So I talked about Entra ID a lot because I see that a lot because Microsoft does a great job of providing a product which everyone wants to use, Entra ID. But similar attacks work in, say, Okta, in AWS. So there are similar things. I've just put a table of what similar attacks do work in AWS. That's modern identity providers. If you are interested in talking about the good old Active Directory, I love Active Directory. I'm going to be talking about that tomorrow for 4 hours. Who wants to hear about Active Directory for 4 hours? Yeah, everyone, right? Okay. So I'm going to talk about Active Directory for 4 hours tomorrow morning. It's probably for 3 hours. The reason I have this here is if you want to be in this workshop or you want to play along, there's a link here which has a virtual machine which you can download, bring up a couple of machines, set them up. We're going to talk about Active Directory. We're going to talk about Kerberos in depth, in detail, talk about features in Kerberos and how they work and how they can be broken. We're going to talk about golden ticket, Kerberosing, a lot of interesting stuff. That's going to happen tomorrow. Do remember this presentation deck is available at that link. And I'm the only one standing between you and the bar, so I'm going to get away. And I'll see you tomorrow. Thank you, everyone, for showing up.